This story can be told 1,000 times, each time adding new details. In fact, it appeared like this. It grew out of hearsay, absorbing the dreams and aspirations of ordinary soldiers. Football during the Christmas Truce is a fairy tale that the world believed in 1914 and continues to believe in today, despite the fact that scientists treat it as a figment of someone's imagination. But this is exactly the case when the story itself is more important than the answer to the question, did it really happen? Christmas Eve, 1914. The British, sitting in dirty trenches, throw cards, smoke. Someone unpacks gifts sent from home. They sent everything that could help the frontline soldiers in their service, and at least temporarily immerse them in the atmosphere of home. Real, but almost forgotten. Almost forgotten because the war, which was supposed to last 2 or 3 months, had already dragged on for 6 months, and dragged on viscously and senselessly. On the Western Front, by December 1914, a line had formed from the North Sea to the Swiss border where the Allies and the Germans had run into each other. Advancement was impossible on either side, and so the battles that continued anyway were needlessly taking the lives of hundreds of soldiers. And those who were trapped in the trenches lived in inhuman conditions. And everyone longed for peace. Somewhere in the area of the city of Ypres, in today's Belgium, in a particularly swampy area, an event occurred that became the embodiment of this desire, the desire for peace. Hearing the quietly drawn-out Stille Nacht from the German side, British soldiers, carefully holding white flags in their hands, climbed out of the trenches. Barely restrained by mistrust, but spurred on by mutual curiosity, yesterday's adversaries moved towards each other, and one of the British shook the German's hand. It was not yet peace, but already an armistice. Peace to the entire front. In early December 1914, Pope Benedict XV called on the warring European countries to stop the conflict, at least for the duration of the Christmas holidays. A truce seemed possible in general. Sometimes the opponents agreed to ceasefire in order to collect the bodies of the dead, lying in the fields, hanging on barbed wire and emitting a terrible smell. During these sad procedures, the Germans, French, and English met and smoked. Besides, let me remind you, this is Europe. The countries on the continent are closely connected, and, for example, the Germans visited France in large numbers. In general, the people on the front on both sides were not strangers to each other. Vladimir Lapin, professor of the history department of the European University in St. Petersburg, tells Lenta. Rue. The Pope received an official refusal. At the same time, the front was really in the Christmas spirit by Christmas Eve. It sounds surprising now, but the Germans, for example, made their trenches beautiful by hanging fir branches, toys, and candles. The British were unpacking bags of sweets, gingerbread, and cigarettes sitting in the mud of the trenches. The war had long since entered a static stage, and by Christmas Eve it had practically died down, in some places, of course. And so the soldiers, separated by a strip of 70 to 100 meters, began to shout at each other occasionally. In the end, no one needed permission. A truce arose by itself. On neutral territory, they exchanged sweets, talked, smoked, joked, remembered home, and dreamed, each about his own. Suddenly, a ball appeared from somewhere. It seemed to have fallen from the sky. Someone immediately dragged a tattered jacket, some old boots. They made bars out of this. The British volunteered 11 times, and the Germans put forward their own team, which ultimately turned out to be stronger, 3-2. The spontaneous football match became a symbol of the sudden end of murder. It is celebrated in films, commercials, and music videos. It is spoken of as a fact at the level of leaders of entire countries. And in 2014, UEFA, celebrating the centenary of the Christmas Truce, released a video in which football stars read out soldiers' memoirs, which described that very game. But the point is that we only know about the Christmas match from the words of eyewitnesses. A soldier could write home and tell how his neighbor in the trench heard that there was such a game somewhere. In addition, people are always inclined to liven up the picture. They supplement it with new details, based on some rumors or simply invented ones. The football match, in principle, became the central theme in the story of the Christmas Truce, although the truth about it is probably even less known than fiction. A fairy tale for big and small, the frontline soldiers really did play football, in the rear. All the units occupying the front lines were periodically withdrawn to the back. There they ate, slept, rested. What else could they do? Play football, says Professor Lapin. In addition, it is known that the Daily Mail sent leather balls to the Western Front, which could very well have ended up on the front lines, and for a very funny reason. Returning to the trenches, the soldiers could very well have taken the ball with them, simply because they did not trust those who came to replace them in the rear, so that in 2 weeks, if they survived, they could play again, describes Vladimir Lapin. So on Christmas Day, the ball really could have fallen from the sky. But the question is, on what ground? What? Along the entire line dividing the opposing sides, it is almost impossible to find a place suitable for football. The ground in neutral territory was dug up by shell strikes and covered with wooden splinters. In addition, Flanders is endless swamps. The water in the trenches was sometimes knee-deep. What kind of football is that? Historian Robert Baker points out that some of the soldiers' letters where they talk about football mention the village of Messines on the border of today's France and Belgium. This is the same Flanders, but less swampy. In this place, according to Baker, the meeting could have taken place if it did. But the fact is that the match, according to all the rules, is mentioned only in the messages of the British. Among the German soldiers, no one even mentioned it. The opinions of historians, as a rule, coincide. There was no match in the usual sense in some areas of neutral territory. The opponent simply threw the ball back and forth. And the version itself, described just above, arose only because of the overlapping of various rumors and outright fiction. And the main thing is that everyone wants to believe it. And that's how it turns out. The picture, having passed through many sources, is overgrown with such a number of details that it is impossible to refute, says Lapin. It turns out that the story with the football match is just a Christmas fairy tale, and a purely soldier's one at that. It was necessary for those who sat for weeks in damp trenches, constantly risking getting a bullet in the head. Football here acts as a unifying principle, and not some kind of fantastic one, but quite real in words. It was a fairy tale of men, Lapin sums up. And if for the soldiers it was a symbol of hope for a quick peace, then for everyone else it simply made them believe in life and humanity again. After all, since childhood we played with who knows what: cans, crumpled rags, old deflated balls, and instead of goalposts, there were worn-out boots, large stones, or the gates of a neighbor's house. It turns out that it is not animals who are shooting at each other at the front now, but still people capable of such childishness. That is why the mythical football match so easily flowed from the plane of was not, to the plane of I believe, I do not believe. And any Christmas miracle, as we know, exists in it.